He raised his spear to kill, then dropped to his knees and offered water to his enemy. The crowd fell silent. Billions watched, stunned. But what happened next changed everything. First, let's go back to the beginning. The crowd screamed like a hive of hungry predators. Their cries of "blood, blood" vibrated through the bones of the Colosseum, a structure forged from the twisted ambitions of two empires that had forgotten the meaning of peace. Lights, brighter than any sun Zack had known, bathed the killing floor in a sterile glow, making every drop of blood gleam like rubies under a magnifying glass. This was not a battlefield. This was a ritual, a spectacle, and Zack Holt was its offering. He stood bare-chested, sweat clinging to his skin like a second layer, his pulse hammering in his ears louder than the crowd. His fists clenched and unclenched at his sides. Every muscle in his lean, wiry frame ached to move, to strike, to tear. Yet he remained still, his eyes locked across the arena at the monster that had haunted his nightmares for the last 18 months. Vorak, a Takari war beast, nearly 8 feet tall, covered in dark crimson hide that glistened with old scars and fresh ceremonial oil. His jaw was squared and split with vertical tusks, and his yellow eyes, burning, feral, regarded Zack not with fury, but with a heavy, unreadable calm. It was that calm that enraged Zack the most. This thing had ripped Zack's brother Mason out of his exosuit like a crab from its shell. The combat footage had gone viral on Earth's underground networks before the censors could pull it. Mason's final scream, the sharp crack of his spine breaking across Vorak's knee, the splash of blood against the camera lens. That was the moment Zack stopped being a soldier and became a weapon. He had volunteered for the gladiator exchange, not for peace, not for patriotism, but for retribution. He trained for 11 months straight in Earth's Arctic barracks, undergoing surgeries, enhancements, neural reflex dampeners, anything to close the evolutionary gap between a man and a Takari. Pain had been constant, but not as constant as the image of Mason's broken body falling to alien soil. Now, as the announcer bellowed their names in 8 languages, and the gates sealed shut behind them, Zack's fury became a blade honed to a single edge. He would not beg. He would not hesitate. He would not offer mercy. Today, the crowd would chant for blood, and he would give them his brother's vengeance. Zack's blade sliced through the charged air like lightning, fast, full of fury, but not fast enough. Vorak's arm moved with unhurried precision, deflecting the strike with the flat of his axe. Sparks leapt from steel, but Vorak didn't follow through. No counterstrike, no retaliation, just silence and space. The crowd erupted in jeers, an angry wave of noise that pounded the arena walls. "Fight!" they roared. "Kill him!" Others hurled objects, cups, bones, even blades, at the arena floor. Bloodlust had been promised. Mercy was an insult. Zack stumbled back, blinking through sweat and confusion. His training screamed that hesitation meant death, that Takari never pulled punches, that this moment was a trap. But the trap never closed. Instead, Vorak took a deliberate step backward and lowered his axe, its massive blade resting in the dust like an ancient relic too weary to rise again. "You do not understand me," the alien said at last, his voice like stone grinding against iron. The words were slow, deliberate, accented by growls shaped into language through effort rather than ease. "But I understand you." Zack's breathing faltered. He circled slowly, sword still raised. "What the hell are you doing?" Vorak did not answer right away. His glowing yellow eyes, narrow and set deep under a heavy brow, watched Zack not like prey, but like a man studying something precious and painful. "Your brother, Mason Holt. He fought bravely. He..." screamed your name as he died." The sentence was like a fissure splitting open inside Zach's chest. His knees almost buckled, not from pain but from the weight of hearing that name spoken, not on earth, not in a graveyard, but here, in the filth of a murder ring masquerading as diplomacy. "How do you know his name?" Zach rasped. "I learn names," Vorak said. "All names, every life I take. They live in my memory. That is my burden." Zach lowered his weapon a fraction, unintentionally, instinctively. Nothing in his training had prepared him for this. Vorak was supposed to be a savage, a war beast, a mindless killer. Instead, Zach now faced something far more dangerous, an enemy with a conscience. A long moment stretched between them. Not truce, no, not that, but a fracture in the narrative Zach had built his fury on. For the first time since he entered the arena, he did not know what to do next. And that uncertainty burned hotter than hate. The clash of steel echoed through the dust-fogged arena, but it wasn't Vorak's axe Zach parried this time. Instead, he found himself locked in combat with a three-armed assassin from the Sindari Dominion, her body wreathed in blades and neurofibers. She moved like lightning and struck like venom. Zach's shoulder bled from a glancing hit, but before the next blow could land, a crimson blur intercepted the assassin mid-strike. Vorak. The Takari's axe swept up, not to kill, but to knock the Sindari off balance. She rolled back into the dust with a hiss and vanished into the fray. Zach stared at Vorak, chest heaving, sword half raised. No words passed between them. None were needed. From that moment on, they fought not as enemies, but as two soldiers whose blades turned outward toward the system that pitted them like rabid dogs before the masses. When the match ended, the two were separated, dragged to their cells through different iron tunnels that stank of rust, sweat, and antiseptic. The holding quarters were glass cubes stacked across a wide chamber like zoo exhibits. Zach collapsed into the corner of his own, ribs throbbing, adrenaline burning off like steam. Then he saw Vorak. The Takari was on his knees, motionless in the dim light, before a crude altar of what appeared to be carved bone and dull crystals. Each one unique, each placed with almost sacred care. The giant's massive frame, all muscle and scar tissue, hunched over like a penitent priest. His tusked jaw moved in silent rhythm, lips brushing old chants in a language that sounded like groaning wind and falling stones. Zach leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "What is that?" Vorak didn't look up. "Memory," he said. "Remembrance. Every warrior I kill, I carry, in crystal, in bone, in spirit." "You collect trophies?" Zach scoffed. "No," Vorak replied, eyes rising. "I confess, each death burdens me, so I choose to fight less, not more." Zach was quiet. This wasn't the glorified killer the Earth broadcasts had shown. This was someone who wore grief like armor, someone who bled on the inside and dared to preserve the names of his enemies. Later that night, through coded whispers and guarded exchanges, Zach learned that Vorak had been taken from his clan at 10, branded, reconditioned, weaponized. Arena contracts were his chains. He did not kill for pleasure or glory. He killed for the right to stop killing. And suddenly, everything Zach thought he knew about war, revenge, and honor began to crack like old ice underfoot. The lights in the holding bay dimmed to their lowest cycle, casting a faint amber haze across the row of containment cells. For the first time in days, there were no alarms, no screaming fans, no scent of scorched plasma, just silence. Rare, unguarded, dangerous in what it revealed. Zach sat cross-legged in his cell, his shirt stripped off, bandaging a knife wound along his ribs with fraying cloth. Across the narrow aisle, Vorak leaned against the glass wall of his own cell, gaze fixed on nothing. His breathing was shallow but steady, like someone who'd made peace with pain long ago. "Tell me something," Zach said quietly, almost despite himself. "Why do you still fight? You could have let me kill you that first round." Vorak turned his head slowly. Then, without a word, he stood and stepped into the overhead light. His thick fingers moved to the clasp of his armored tunic, undoing it with mechanical calm. The chest plate dropped with a metallic thud. Beneath it, Vorak's chest bore a constellation of old wounds, but one stood out. A perfect circle, charred into his flesh just above the heart, surrounded by etched Tekari glyphs. "This," Vorak said, voice low but firm. "This was given to me when I disobeyed." Zach's brow tightened. "What did you do?" Vorak stared at him a long time before answering. "On Garros 9, the warlords demanded a display, a village, full of enemies, but among them was a child, no older than your earthlings' younglings. She offered me food, said I looked hungry. I refused to strike." Zach swallowed, the image already forming in his mind. "They made me choose," Vorak continued, his eyes darkening. "Kill her, or kill my brother. My only kin left. When I refused both, they slit my brother's throat and branded me while I screamed." The silence that followed was heavier than steel. Zach didn't look away. He couldn't. Something in him, something primal and buried under months of rage, cracked. This wasn't some hollow redemption tale. This was ruin. Not just pain, but the kind of moral obliteration that no amount of fighting could ever cleanse. Zach turned his eyes downward, fists tightening against the floor. For so long, he had seen Vorak as the face of his brother's death. Now, he saw a mirror. When the order came the next day, it felt surreal. Back in the Earthside command hub, his superior officer, Colonel Reed, stared at him through a grainy holoscreen. "Time to wrap this up, Holt. The arena's losing ratings. They want closure. Make it personal. Make it clean." Zach gave a curt nod, voice steady. "Yes, sir." But inside, a quiet war had begun. Not between man and alien, but between the duty he wore and the truth he now carried. The arena pulsed like a living organism, steel veins thrumming with power, the roar of the crowd crashing against the force field dome overhead like waves of pure hunger. 91 star systems tuned in. Billions of eyes watched. Betting markets surged with last-minute wagers. The death match had been marketed for weeks. Human vengeance versus alien brutality. The son of Earth versus the beast of Takar. One would fall, one would rise, and the universe would feast on the spectacle. Zach stood at the gate, helmet off, jaw locked. A plasma spear pulsed in his grip, its blade humming a steady tone that synchronized with his heartbeat. The collar around his neck, standard issue for all gladiators, had been deactivated. He was free to kill, free to win, free to do what they expected. Across the sand, Vorak emerged, not marching, but dragged. Shackles clanked with every step, the weight of them a message to the crowd. This beast has been tamed, wounded, weakened for your pleasure. Blood trickled from a gash above his brow, caked into the ridges of his tusks. Still, he walked upright, pride intact. There was no fear in his eyes, only fatigue, and something else, something Zach could now recognize. Peace. The announcer's voice thundered over the arena speakers. "Final match! One leaves alive!" The crowd erupted, a tidal wave of sound demanding blood, screams, chants, drum-pounding ecstasy. The air reeked of ozone, sweat, and unspoken cruelty. Zack stepped forward. Vorak raised his eyes to meet him. No words passed between them. The moment had arrived. Zack walked across the sand, slow and deliberate, the spear in his hand crackling with potential. Then, without warning, he dropped to one knee. The silence that followed struck like an asteroid. Gasps. Then utter stillness. A billion viewers leaned in. Zack reached beneath his tunic and withdrew a battered canteen, the only water he was permitted during the match, a reward designated for the victor. His hand shook as he held it out. "For him," he said, voice thick with emotion amplified by the arena's neural relay. "Not for the crowd, not for Earth, not for Takar." His voice grew stronger. "This isn't justice. This is theater, and I'm done playing the villain." The spear lay beside him, unclaimed. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't boo. They didn't know how to react. They had come for slaughter. What they got was mercy, raw, defiant, and completely unscripted. And it shattered everything they thought they understood about war. The drones descended before the silence had even settled. Sleek, wasp-shaped enforcers screamed out from shadow ports high above the arena, their wings buzzing with lethal intent. Spotlights flared to life, pinning Zack and Vorak in harsh white beams. Commands barked in multiple languages flooded the loudspeakers. "Gladiators, down! Do not resist! Kneel! Comply!" Zack didn't move. Neither did Vorak. The canteen still hovered between them, held in Zack's outstretched hand, a gesture more dangerous than any weapon. Two guards in exo armor sprinted across the sand, rifles raised. Zack was tackled to the ground, arms twisted behind his back. The canteen clattered, spilling water onto the dust, more precious than gold in that place. Vorak roared as they surrounded him, but chained and half dead, he couldn't resist. The butt of a rifle cracked against his jaw. Blood spilled again, this time not for sport, but for order. The match was declared null. The sacred ritual of battle had been violated. The crowd, so rabid only moments ago, now sat stunned, unsure whether they had witnessed heresy or history. But no amount of confusion inside the arena could match what had already begun outside of it. The broadcast delay, set to 90 seconds for censorship control, failed. One technician, a junior engineer from the Archon outpost, left the relay stream uncapped. The footage slipped into the raw network stream. From there, it spread like plasma through a cracked hull. It showed Zack kneeling, the human warrior offering water, not death. The Takari lowering his head, not in defeat, but in quiet, stunned reverence. It wasn't the moment the Empire had paid for. It was the moment no one could unsee. Within hours, it was on every back channel across the colonies. By dawn, it was playing in refugee camps, in the burned-out barracks of rebel factions, in hidden bunkers beneath mining moons. It was replayed in slow motion, set to music, framed as art. Children reenacted the scene in the streets of broken cities, not as a game, but as a prayer. Across a dozen systems, fighters laid down their weapons mid-duel. Opponents embraced. Blood matches ended not in death, but in mercy. Arena No More became a whisper, then a chant, then a creed. The Empire branded Zack Holt a traitor. Vorak was declared a war criminal. But to the forgotten, the enslaved, and the exiled, they had become something else entirely. Not rebels, not martyrs, but proof. Proof that even in a galaxy built on cruelty, a single act of compassion could detonate across space like a supernova, blinding, undeniable, and forever changing the orbit of history. The interior of the prison transport was a stripped-down coffin of steel and silence, built to crush hope before it could draw breath. The lights flickered with imperial indifference, and every surface reeked of antiseptic and dried blood. Zack sat with his back against the wall, hands shackled at the wrists, legs chained at the ankles. Across from him, other prisoners slumped in resignation, humans, aliens, hybrids, all marked with the same brand, non-compliant. He had stopped trying to explain himself weeks ago. Words like mercy, justice, truth, they didn't belong here. Not in this floating graveyard headed for Mars 7, a penal colony known unofficially as Red Silence. Executions weren't scheduled there. They simply happened, buried under accidents and malfunctions. You arrived. You vanished. Until a sound tore the monotony apart, a low, guttural growl that crawled through the vents like a beast rousing from ancient slumber. Zack's head jerked up. That sound didn't belong to any machine. Seconds later, the side wall of the cell bay ripped open in a blaze of molten sparks. Screams followed. Smoke choked the room. Through the chaos, a massive figure emerged, crimson-skinned, tusked, and unchained. Vorak. He wore no armor, only ceremonial wraps marked with white glyphs, the sigils of Takari pacifists, exiled warriors who had renounced blood oaths and now operated in the shadows, rescuing those deemed too dangerous to be saved. Around Vorak, 2 more Takari moved with calculated silence, stunning guards and unshackling prisoners. Zack stood as his restraints were cut. For a moment, he and Vorak simply looked at each other, not as savior and saved, but as 2 men who had already walked through death and chosen to turn back. "I heard the Empire executed you," Zack said, half smirking through the smoke. "They tried," Vorak growled. "But stories are harder to kill than men." They escaped into the vacuum tunnels, hijacked a transport, and disappeared into the blackness between systems. But they did not go into hiding. They went to work. In hidden nodes across the galactic fringe, their message began to broadcast, unauthorized, untraceable, and impossible to scrub. The video showed Zack and Vorak seated beside one another, no longer captor and captive, no longer enemy and avenger. "We are the sons of war," Zack began, his voice low but unwavering. "Forged in blood, raised in hate." Vorak's voice followed, deep and resonant. "But we choose another path." That signal cut through the void like a blade through silence, and the galaxy listened. It began not with warships, nor decrees, nor broadcasts, but with a spark. A single ignition point buried beneath the foundation stones of the Colosseum Hyperia, the grandest of the Empire's blood arenas. For centuries, it had stood as a monument to sanctioned slaughter, its arches stained with the memory of screams and the dust of 1,000 deaths. The elite dined on carnage. The oppressed sold their lives for rations and illusions of honor. But the slaves beneath it, janitors, body burners, corpse haulers, orphaned teens who scrubbed gore from stone, had not forgotten the kneeling man and the monster who refused to kill. They waited, planned, buried fusion charges beneath the foundations where the bones of the forgotten lay. And then they lit the match. The arena cracked open from its core like a dying star. Steel ribs buckled. Marble statues of past champions, sculpted in triumph, mouths frozen mid-battle cry, were reduced to ash in seconds. Holograms of previous kill records shattered into static, and the Empire's proudest monument became a smoking crater etched into history's skin. When the smoke cleared, the survivors, once nameless workers and subjugated fighters, built something new on the ruins. No thrones, no leaders' busts, no weapons mounted on pillars. Just one monument, simple and silent. a life-sized sculpture of a human kneeling in the dust, water cupped in his hand, offering it to a chained Takari. No faces, no inscriptions, only the moment itself. The message was unmistakable. This is what courage looks like now. Zach Holt and Vorak vanished soon after. No public farewells, no final speech. Some claimed to have seen them boarding a stealth cruiser bound for the outer fringe. Others swore they'd glimpsed them in desert colonies training new warriors in the art of peace, the kind of fighters who learned to master blades not to kill, but to defend truth, bridge cultures, and guard the sacred right to not raise a weapon. They became myth, yes, but not the kind etched in stone by conquerors. They became a memory etched in children's games, in outlawed schoolbooks, in whispered lullabies sung on refugee moons. In a galaxy that once celebrated death for sport, young ones now played a different game, one where the winner was the first to kneel. And though the echo of the arena's roar still lingered in some corners of space, it was drowned now by a stronger sound, the silence of mercy, rippling outward like a healing wound across the stars.